Alrighty, hello chemistry students. So clearly I'm out today. Last class we were working on that conservation of mass lab, and today you're going to be taking that lab that you did and converting it into a lab notebook. So in the field of chemistry, lab notebooks are a huge deal. Every college class I took for chemistry or biology or botany all had a lab notebook. So today I'm going to go over what is expected of your lab notebook, and you're going to get the majority of class today to convert your lab into a lab notebook format. I'm going to show you some examples of lab notebooks from students in past years and show you what's something good to do, what's some bad things to do, and hopefully set you up for success as we continue to use these lab notebooks throughout the course of this year. And you'll have then at the end of the year all of the labs you've ever done, and you'll be able to see how far you've come and how much work you've done. So you should have this sheet of paper that the sub passed out to you, and this just is a general overview of what is expected of each lab. So in your lab notebook, you're going to have a table of contents. That's just going to be at the front of the notebook, and you'll have that. It'll be like 1 or 2 pages, and you'll always have it there so that you can see where pages go. You're gonna have, and then after that, all of this stuff will be in every single lab. So every lab will have a title, a date, your lab partners, the purpose, introduction, a procedure, data, calculations, and an analysis section. So you'll be graded on all of this, and then in addition, you'll be graded on your presentation. So is your notebook neat? How's your spelling, your grammar? Is it legible? Is it good? And participation, just like, were you being safe in lab? Were you helping out, or was your group doing all the work? Okay. So this is pretty broad, and then there's a breakdown of everything that is expected of you at the bottom. So as we go through this, I'm going to just explain what I expect of each thing and then show you some examples. So if we go down to the second page, to start with the table of contents, just make sure you save the first 2 pages of your chemistry notebook for the table of contents. Okay, and I'll show you what your table of contents will look like. This outlines it specifically though. In addition to having a table of contents, please number every single one of the pages in your lab notebook. It is up to you whether you want to use front and back of each page or just the front of each page, but make sure you're numbering every page that you plan on writing on. Okay. For me, I would prefer, if you have a really dark pen that goes through to the back of your page, to only use 1 page at a time and not write on the front and back. But if you're not a super hard writer and your pen doesn't go through to the back, I'm completely fine if you're writing on both sides of the page as long as it's legible on both sides. So just make sure you're numbering your pages. When you are numbering your pages, the numbering is going to go in the bottom right corner of every page, okay? So the page numbers go in the bottom right corner. So I don't have page numbers on here, but if I did, they would go right here. Okay, so in this bottom right corner. Hopefully you can see my mouse moving. I don't actually know if you can. Okay. Next up is the title. So the title is the name of each lab, which I will always give to you. So of course for this lab, the title is Conservation of Mass Lab. Every single page that you spend in your notebook talking about the conservation of mass lab, your title needs to be at the top of every single one of those pages. So as soon as you turn open to a page in your notebook, I can see exactly what lab I'm looking at. So again, that title is going to go at the top of every page that you use to describe your conservation of mass lab. Along with your title, you're also going to include the date, so the date that you performed the lab, and also who your lab partners were, so I know who you worked with on this lab. Your name and your lab partners don't need to go on every page. When I was in college, they did. I won't have you do that for now because I know this is your notebook, but make sure the title is on every page. The date and your lab partners need to only be on the first page of the lab. Purpose is what comes next. So sometimes I'm going to give you the purpose of a lab. Sometimes I'm going to have you figure that out for yourself. So the purpose is just a brief statement of what the objective of the lab is. So what are we trying to solve while doing this lab? So in the conservation of mass lab, what were we trying to figure out? Okay. Generally, this will always be done before you start a lab. Okay. So we're doing it after this time because this is a little bit of a different type of lab as we're just learning how to write a lab notebook. But in general, this will always be done before you start your lab. Okay. This could be a bulleted list. You can include like a statement of purpose. That's up to you on how it looks, but you will have your purpose on every lab. After after the purpose, you'll have your introduction. And just a note too, make sure you write purpose out, like write the word purpose and then put your purpose next to it. So I can easily look at your lab and be like, oh, where's the purpose? Where's the introduction start? Where's the procedure start? So it's easy for me to navigate your lab. Continuing, after the purpose is your introduction. So the introduction is just a detailed discussion of things you need to know in order to do this lab. So was there important background information? Is there vocabulary that you learned that you need to know? So like for the conservation of mass lab, maybe what is mass? What is the definition of mass? What is the definition of conservation? You're going to define all new vocabulary terms and just discuss each concept being studied at the beginning of the lab. Something else you might want to include in your introduction is just like your knowledge probe of prior to this lab, this is what I knew about mass. Here's the actual definition of mass. We were looking at the conservation of mass, which means ... Your introduction is going to be in complete sentences, so make sure that is good. It's not a bulleted list. The next part gets a little bit different. For this lab, it is going to be a little bit different just because your prediction does happen to be falling inside your data table, but your hypothesis is next. Your hypothesis or prediction must always be in if, then, because format, which we have talked about in class, hopefully at this point. Maybe we haven't gotten there yet. But it does need to be an if, then, because. So if I do this, then this will happen because of this reason, because of this scientific reason. Okay, and again, for this lab, that prediction is in the data table I provided you, so you can just include that prediction still in the data table you're drawing, or if you'd like, you can just list all your predictions for all of the experiments you completed here. Next part is the procedure. So for some labs, I'm going to have you include a procedure, and for others, I'm not going to have you include a procedure. So for this lab, I provided you the procedure for every single lab. So I'm not going to have you just regurgitate the information back to me and rewrite exactly what I gave to you. So for this lab, you can skip the procedure. I'm going to say that again. You do not need to write the procedure in your lab notebook for the conservation of mass lab. However, for other labs, you will need to write a detailed procedure. Okay? It includes a materials list, which if you want, you can include a materials list in this lab. It includes steps of what you need to do. It includes units when you need them. It tells you how much of each chemical to use. It needs to be super specific so that if someone else is looking at your lab later down the road, they can repeat exactly what you did. Okay? Another piece of information is just the next thing is going to be data and observation. So this is where you're going to put that data table. In this lab, I gave you an exact data table to use. I would support that you make this data table directly in your lab notebook. No, you can't cut out the one you already made and just paste it in. So a couple important things about data tables is make sure your lines are straight. I got some janky data tables last year, okay? Grab a ruler out of the supplies closet and use it. Make a good data table. Make it legible. Make sure you have enough space to write in there. Don't make teeny, tiny little boxes and try to cram your words in. Use paper. You have it. If you run out, we can get you another notebook. Okay? So make sure that you are including everything you need in your data table. Make sure it's including important things. Make sure it has units if it needs them. It should be an easy way for me to look at your lab and see exactly the data you collected. Underneath the data and observations is a space for calculations. In this lab, your only calculation was your change in mass. So, many of our labs we do will rely on formulas. Okay? If you haven't listed the formula in the introduction, you need to list it under the calculation spot. So where it says calculations, write the formula of final mass minus initial mass equals the change in mass. At times, I am going to have you show me all your math here that you did. So all of your calculations, you'll have to show me all of the math that you performed to get your answers. This lab is just a simple subtraction problem, so I'm not going to have you show me this math, but show me the formula you used to solve this problem. And then lastly, the final thing to have on your lab is your answer to your analysis questions. Okay, sorry, some people knocked on my door, so hopefully I'm back where I think I am. But I was talking about analysis questions. So I will always provide you with analysis questions that I want you to answer at the end of the lab. So notice on your conservation of mass lab, you have 5 questions that you needed to answer for this lab. Hopefully you haven't already done those. I told you not to do them in class, so hopefully you haven't done them. What you're going to be doing, sorry, I have the hiccups now, is answering these questions. Most important part of this section is these analysis questions. So most of your time should be spent here answering these, because this is your conclusion basically to the entire lab. Your analysis questions do need to be incomplete sentences, and they need to be your own words. So this section, you don't really work with your group. You can discuss them with your group and talk to make sure you're understanding things correctly, but they need to be in your own words. You need to be writing on your own. If I'm reading your labs and you and your partner both have the same exact analysis questions, neither of you are getting points for them, unfortunately. Okay, you need to do this on your own. You're gonna have the same data and very similar answers because you do have the same data, but how you're presenting your data and talking about it needs to be in your own words. As far as analysis questions go, if you want to write out the question and then answer it, that's fine. If you want to just straight up answer the question, put number 1 in an answer, that's okay as well. I am fine with either of those options. Okay. Some other really important things to talk about with lab notebooks, and I'll make myself bigger here. Your lab notebook has to be written in pen. Okay, I know that's going to be a big deal for some of you because you don't like to make mistakes, but it has to be written in pen. Okay, a big part of science is they want to see all the trials you do. So if you do a trial and it really doesn't work out, you don't just cross it out, you keep it in your notebook so you can see what mistakes you made. Okay, so your lab notebook will be written in pen. If you don't have a pen, I have some at the side of the room underneath the big periodic table for you to grab. With it being in pen, your pen needs to be black or blue. Do not be writing 6 pages of a lab notebook in red pen, or I will be really sad. So please make sure you're writing in blue or black ink only for your lab notebook. In addition to that, if you make a mistake in your lab, so let's say you're going to write procedure, oh, this part here doesn't work very good, and you actually spell it really wrong. So you write this. You don't just cross it out like with a squiggly line or X it all over. When you make mistakes in your lab notebook, you cross them out one time. One single line through the word. I know this seems really tedious. However, I had 2 professors in college, and if you used a squiggly line, you lost a 1/4 of a point every single time. Okay? Not saying you're gonna have that professor in college, but just like getting you in the thought process of like thinking about what you're doing and like really following instructions that are given to you. So you get 1 line to cross out any mistakes you made. Sometimes you might mess up an entire page. Okay, you drew a data table and it was garbage data table. You decided you wanted to use a different format. You cannot just rip that page out of your notebook. Like I said before, it stays. If you mess up a whole page that you don't need to cross out every single line, it is okay if on your page, if this is your page, you just put 1 big X through the entire page. Okay, if on your page you have your little data table up here and you decide you don't want that data table, but you want this one, you can cross out just that data table. Okay, if that doesn't make sense, let me know and I can help explain that further too. For this lab, I'm not going to grade you super intensely, but I am going to mark up your books. Okay, I'm going to show you where you're doing things wrong. I'm going to show you how I want things changed in the future. So if you put a lot of time and effort into this now, you don't have much to fix. But really take your time on this, work at it, and really create a good quality lab. So now I'm going to show you some examples of some good labs in the past. So to start, I just want to show you what the table of contents looks like. So this is what a table of contents looked like from a student's lab from last year. So they wrote table of contents instead of contents, which is fine. But under theirs, they have the experiment listed, and then they numbered out all the experiments we did. We ended up only getting through 8 experiments because of COVID and all that stuff, but that's okay. Next to the experiment, you're going to write what page numbers that experiment covers. Okay, so if I'm looking at this lab and I want to find that separate that mixture lab, I know if I go to page 24, so remember they have their page numbers down here. I found page 24 and I am on the separate that mixture lab. Okay, so that's what your table of contents should look like. It needs to have the title of the lab as well as the page numbers it covers. And you're not going to know those page numbers right away. Of course, your page number might start with number 3 for this time if you're starting on page 3, but don't fill in that final page until your whole lab is finished. So here's what a lab notebook looks like. Okay, so again, we have our title, our date, and our lab partners. We have our purpose and introduction listed, as well as our whole data table drawn out. Okay, notice here this student made a mistake, so they used that X to cross it out. They included their calculations. And then, big mistake, there's no analysis questions. If you're gonna make a mistake in lab, don't ever miss the analysis questions. Analysis questions are the most points of the lab because they do take the most time. And those are generally what I'm reading through to make sure you comprehended the lab, okay? This is another lab that was done by another student. And notice theirs is pretty fancy looking. This isn't expected of you. So, of course, it's a girls. But this is the chemistry in a bag lab. So notice they made it super fancy. They have their purpose, their intro. They listed out their procedure for this specific lab. They have their data table written. This is one thing I noticed. So they have a really teeny tiny data table. Feel free to make it bigger if you need to. But notice their lines are very straight. It's very clean. Okay. Yeah, I think that's all I really wanted to show you. Just make sure that you are including everything you need in your lab. Before you turn in your lab, go through it. Make sure you have everything you need. Make sure everything is listed. Make sure you're answering all the final questions and everything is in the correct format. Again, this is your first lab, so take your time, work with others, ask them questions, work through it with each other since I am not there to help you out. I will make this a little bit easier on you. Sorry, another person came to the door. So again, I won't be grading labs too difficult, but still I want you to put in your best effort. Make this great. This is your first lab, so I want to see what you got, see what you can turn in. If you have questions, again, talk to each other, email me, maybe I'll respond, probably not, but I will definitely help you out when I come back next week. Have a good day.